Osiris.
It's the inaugural record release from Discograffiti. Metal Machine Muzak is a slanted tribute to Lou Reed's divisive 1975 double LP Metal Machine Music. Lester Bangs called it the greatest album ever made, but no matter how it hits you, it's always been the ultimate music freak's secret handshake. My ambient reimagining features 4 16-minute 1-second tracks, just like the original, and each one was created by a top-shelf indie rock visionary. Lou Barlow from Dinosaur Jr. and Sebadoh, Corey Hansen from Wand, W. Cullen Hart from the Olivia Tremor Control, and Mark Robinson from Unrest. That's right, not a slouch in the bunch, unlike 99% of the compilations you've ever begrudgingly purchased for the one and only band on it you just had to hear. Metal Machine Muzak will not be available on streaming. The digital version is finally available for purchase, and the vinyl will be shipped this summer. Pre-orders for the LPs are available now, but they're going fast. They're being produced in a very limited edition run of 300 numbered 180-gram metallic silver double LP gatefold copies, only 100 of which can be ordered online. These copies will be numbered from 1 to 100, and they're first come, first served. To order either the digital or the vinyl, just head over to patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Don't miss out on Metal Machine Muzak, the ambient experience designed to make Brian Eno run screaming.
She was a social magnate who we know is responsible for putting together the Lovin' Spoonful and Crosby, Stills and Nash to some extent. She was a singer, she could act, and she was a mom. I think she's just a great personality in the pantheon of American entertainers.
She really is, and she is sorely missed. Welcome to Discograffiti, the Music Obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebroe, and with 3 to 4 episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. I am thrilled to announce that we have partnered with the podcast network Osiris Media, the leading storyteller in music. You can check out all their music podcasts at osirispod.com. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Mama Cass's solo career, along with our unbelievably special guests, band biographer Richard Campbell, who's published an amazing bio, almost like a prequel really, called Gettin' Kinda Itchy, and Be Still My Beating Heart, the absolutely radiant goddess herself, Michelle Phillips. This is part 6 of an epic new series called from a 16-hour interview called Michelle Phillips, the interview of a lifetime, in which Michelle looks back with shockingly raw candor at a life exquisitely well-lived. In part 6, we reveal brutal details about Cass's 1968 solo career coming out party in Las Vegas when she took the stage high on heroin. The confusing divide between Cass's predilection for both Tin Pan Alley style songcraft and countercultural material, and a fact-based demystification of the details surrounding her death. Before we kick things off, just a quick word from Michelle.
Hey lads and ladies, Michelle Phillips here from the Mamas and the Papas. If you're like me and you want it all, then why in the world would you settle for a trimmed down version of my interview? To get access to the extended director's cut of this and all future episodes, just join Discograffiti's Patreon. Dave Gebroe's been singing for his supper for over 2 years now. The guy puts out several shows a week, and it's just the best music podcast of all time. You're not going to want to miss a single minute of it. Patreon.com/Discograffiti. Do it.
If you're a Michelle Phillips and Mamas and the Papas superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the ultimate director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features a whopping 18 additional minutes of essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon record shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Or just subscribe for the complete versions of all our shows. Even if you're on the fence, just head over there because it's finally free to become a basic member. I'm going to take this opportunity now to give a shout out to brand new Patreon member Tyler Davis, an 18-year-old young man with great taste and a soft spot for the Mamas and the Papas, who literally canceled his cable TV and subscribed to Discograffiti at the Brigadier General tier, which is $40 a month. Trust me, if he can find a way, so can you. Tyler, I love you, and you are seriously my hero. Okay, first things first, you need to know just how seriously I take this craziness. Discograffiti is a music obsessive's dream come true. The guest and I explore an artist or band's entire discography in a futile but valiant attempt to reach a higher truth, which often is cleverly disguised as a nerdy compendium of star ratings and lists. The show is heavily researched, and the music is always reassessed with fresh ears. We don't just cover albums. We do a searingly honest deep dive analysis of all EPs, singles, comp tracks, relevant solo work, and sometimes even bootlegs and live stuff. Every release is slapped with an objectively accurate star rating between 0 and 5, which allows us all, the real reason we do this, the Tootsie Pop reward at the center of the rock and roll lolly, to come face to face with the true shape of an artist's overall arc. Coming up, we've got Robert Schneider rating the Strawberry Alarm Clock, the Lemon Twigs, and the 3 surviving Dedrick siblings rating everything they ever released as one of the greatest bands of all time, bar none, The Free Design. Not to mention tons more Michelle Phillips, so don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then!
Cass, as wonderful as a vocalist that she was, did not have any particularly great taste in what she recorded. Make Your Own Kind of Music is the biggest song that she ever had.
What did you want for her to be doing, and what did she want for her to be doing?
I wanted her to be doing real Broadway show music. That's what she loved. And she was trying to, I think, split the difference with what she was doing.
To appeal to too many people?
Yeah. And, she'll always be remembered for Dream a Little Dream of Me as her major song, which is the Mamas and Papas song. And she did not have great musical taste for the time. Who knows what might have happened if she had lived. But there was something so endearing about her. And so smart. She was smart as a whip.
As talented as she was, and this is to her credit, her personality trumped that.
Yes.
She was Mama Cass more so than the things that she was doing.
Yes.
I think this is a really good point Michelle makes, and you see it in some of the things that she did on television. So that's not material that she's chosen for an album, but she really excels in it. And I think also Michelle makes a good point. Who knows what have happened? Just a few years after she died, people like Linda Ronstadt were making albums of standards. Well, Cass probably would have been ahead of them doing that kind of thing because that's where she came from. She had the stature. It probably would have been her to have broken through, done what then Linda Ronstadt, Natalie Cole, other people were doing as pop performers, but are going back to the old stuff because Cass had done some of that. But it would have been great if she had just done an album of standards. It would have been brilliant.
Absolutely. She was raised on that. She would sneak into the back door of a theater to watch a Broadway play when she was living in Baltimore or Washington, D.C. She had no interest, by the way, in rock and roll. I mean, Denny kept saying, John, this is the kind of stuff you should be writing. This is the kind of stuff. And he's playing him the Beatles. Cass liked the Beatles all right. But you'd put a song in front of her like Words of Love, which I wish we had built a play around that song. Because even though Cass wasn't particularly interested in singing it, she wanted me to sing the lead. I said, what? I'm not going to sing the lead. We'd already done the backgrounds, and she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't do it. And John said, Cass, get the fuck up on that Steinway, take the microphone with you, and sing this song. And the track came on. She sang Words of Love, which is a really good song. She sang it in one take, and then she dropped the microphone. She's standing on the top of this Steinway, and she got down and she says, okay, I did it. And we were just like, oh my God, that's such a beautiful, beautiful take. But I don't know, I think she was a little confused about what direction she wanted to go in.
I got to tell you, my favorite side of Cass flies in the face of what you're saying, because my favorite of her work is right out of the gate, Dream a Little Dream of Me, which is, you know, her sort of underground record. Do you not like California Earthquake?
I do like it, but I like it because it's Cass, and I like it because I love any communication I can have between my life and her death.
Sure. But the slide guitar work and the sort of gut bucket blues thing she's doing, I love that. This is one of my favorite Cass Elliot.
Good. I would love to hear an album of the best of Cass Elliot. I would love to hear it because, you know, I just got it in little bits and pieces. And she was so anxious to get out of the group. I mean, she did an album called Don't Call Me Mama Anymore.
Yeah.
And when we went up to Vegas to see her act, she didn't know we were in the audience. And I don't know, Richard, if you remember this, but there was a story, I think in Life magazine or Post magazine called Sink Along with Mama Cass.
Yeah, it's Bill Cloman and Esquire. You're exactly right.
Was it Bill Cloman?
Yeah, he wrote that. Yeah, this is her 68 total bombing out, Dave. And so John and Michelle and Denny all went up there. It was awful.
It was horrifying.
I heard that someone had shot her up with heroin.
These are the Pick Dawson seasons.
Right.
Exactly. This is why I would say to everyone that is listening tonight, just don't try heroin at the very least.
And there's a couple other drugs you should definitely try. Go on to recommend a couple is all I'm saying. All right. One last question about Cass. When you're missing Cass, when that really comes on and you're feeling it strongly, is there something in particular that you put on?
My memories of Cass are so convoluted, and there were times when we couldn't even look at each other. And there were times when we just embraced, and she would say, don't let John talk to you like that. You know, she was my friend, my enemy, many, many things, but I respected her so much. She stood up to John really strongly when he wanted her to get an abortion. And she said, there is no way I'm getting an abortion. My doctor told me that it's a miracle that I'm pregnant because of my weight, and I am going to have this baby. And John said, we're supposed to go on the road. She said, we're going on the road. I'll do it. And she was such a trooper. She was great on the road.
Do you ever carry on a tape recorder when you were with the group, taking any surreptitious recordings or anything that you can go back and listen to?
I wish I had.
Nothing like that?
No, that would never have occurred to any of us.
Yeah, because you were living in the now, in the eternal now.
Yeah.
So what do you listen to? What do you put on with Cass?
Mamas and papas.
Hi, I'm Dave Gebroe. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 4-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate podcast for music obsessives thrive. Now I need your help. Although Discograffiti is rated in the top 2% of all podcasts globally, the economics of this thing are tricky. Becoming a member of Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to over 100 more exclusive episodes. And moving forward now every Sunday for only $5 a month as a private first class, you get our new weekly show by and for Discograffiti's Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. If all you want to do is show some love, there's now finally a $1 tier. Don't miss out. Become a recruit and get your personalized backstage pass for $1. And for the cheapskates, homeless people, and all the bums sponging off mom and dad, don't care, just join. It's now completely free to join as a basic member, and it'll be the only place you'll be able to get our upcoming Lou Barlow, Corey Hansen, Mark Robinson, Will Hart comp, Metal Machine Muzak, as well as the triple album rock opera Elf Harmony I created with Joe Kennedy, and the ability to purchase one-off Patreon episodes. That's it. Back to the show. Before we launch into Cass's career as a solo superstar, I'm always extremely careful to not misuse the word irony, but it is very ironic. And John would be tickled pink and endlessly obsessed with the irony that the ultimate historian of their career is somebody that could have thrown him in the slammer 100 times over.
Yeah, Denny used to tease me about that. I was working in the U.S. Attorney's office not too many years before he died, and he would laugh about that. And then I think I got on the bench before he passed away, and when I would call, he would say, "Here comes the judge."
If you were the judge in the 1980 John Phillips case, would you have given him a pardon?
No.
Okay, good. Okay.
That's easy.
Okay. All right, part one. Cass Elliot. We're going to start with her debut solo record from October 1968, Dream a Little Dream of Me. Is there anything that you want to prelude this with?
Well, I think one thing about it that gets kind of confusing is the connection of Dream a Little Dream of Me. And Michelle's talked about that. It's never been super clear to me how much of the recording that is on that first album, which was recorded in the summer of 68, how much of that particular track is the actual Mamas and Papas and how much was retooled by John Simon. You obviously have the voiceover, in the, whatever it is, 1930s radio sounding sound effect with the Firesign Theater guys. But not only that, but how quickly after the group really officially broke up. I mean, it's coming out basically almost the same time as Papas and Mamas is hitting things. So, that to me makes it a little confusing and interesting, but, people were probably buying both those records together in late 1968.
And they sounded kind of a piece, although Papas and Mamas is a much more turgid listen. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but it's not very fun. Dream a Little Dream has the trappings of a concept record only because of the sound effects, the link tracks, the full experience of the thing.
Yes.
And I think properly capitalizes on the success of the title track. But I think it's worth noting that her solo tenure with Dunhill Records, which ran from 1968 to 1970, at which point she jumped ship for RCA, was a contentious one. The label insisted that she be billed as Mama Cass and that she resume recording in the same soft rock style that had given her past success. And she said in 1971 that at Dunhill, she had been forced to be so bubblegum that I'd stick to the floor when I walked.
Yeah, and I think that was 1971. And I think they did make that turn. I think there's a big reason they made that turn, because in 68, I don't think that they were necessarily pushing her in that direction. So, she does her 68 album, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes in depth. She also does the backgrounds or harmony vocals in Groovin' Is Easy by the Electric Flag. And she's very much, somebody who's in the LA Free Press. So there's a kind of different arc that she's on when she records this first record. I mean, it really is. And it's because of the absolute disaster in Las Vegas in October of 68. So right when the album comes out, that I think they make this, it's not a U-turn, it's a very hard turn, whatever direction, but a different one from that album.
When the Beatles broke up and, all their careers were touched by Beatle magic for like 1 or 2 years before some of that dispersed, you're rooting for all the various members. If I was alive in 68, I would have thought, oh, okay, the Mamas and Papas are done, but at least we're going to have a ton of great stuff to look forward to with Cass, because, this scratches my particular itch. So she had agreed to a 3-album deal as a solo artist with Dunhill, and this is less than a month after her split with the Mamas and Papas. She chose John Simon as the producer to help her steer the thing, who I love. She was a fan of his work with the band, and thought that he was totally simpatico, right?
Yes. And she also was allowed, and I think this was a good thing and it worked, to call in her friends. So that's why you have just this, coterie of all her pals from 1968. I mean, it's a snapshot of her friend group.
The original title for the record was going to be In the Words of My Friends. So there's country, blues, rock, bluegrass, gospel, jazz, and thrown down pretty quickly, not belabored, recorded in, I think, 10 days at Wally Hyder's studio in LA.
That's right. It's very eclectic. You're right. I mean, it's almost like a sampling, like, where should I go next?
Yeah. So do you think of this as a concept album, or is that too reductive just based on tossing a bunch of sound effects in it to thread it together?
No, I think it is.
Yeah. So let's drop the needle on this sucker. The title track is what kicks us off. And obviously there's no better way to bridge into her solo career, especially seeing as initially she fucking hated this song and apparently balked against doing it with all her being, right?
That's the story.
It makes a good story whether or not it's true, but this is a different version, right?
Right. It is at the beginning. And I think it's very difficult for me to tell in terms of once you get into the song. I think that they tooled with the introduction, but I think the body of the song, but of course they didn't release it as a single because it already just come out as a single. Now the single was Mama Cass with the Mamas and the Papas. So she had already sort of had this quasi solo billing with the quote unquote group's single. But yeah, I think it's perfect, and it sets the stage for the concept, if you will, because it opens up with this, let's tune the radio into this.
Right, yeah. So it gives you the vibe of a concept record back in the days when all you needed to do to have a concept record was to throw a song on the front and then just do it again and call it a reprise at the end, and you had yourself a concept album. Yeah. So track 2, California Earthquake, which Michelle is seemingly not a big fan of, reached number 67. I love this song. It's like a gut bucket blues folk thing with amazing slide guitar work on it. It's one of my favorite Mama Cass songs, and great horn work too, killer dynamic arrangement. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, I love it. I mean, it's been called a psychedelic que sera, sera. It's so different. Again, you got to peel yourself back and think about what has come out of Cass Elliot's mouth on record up until this point, and it's nothing like this. It's sort of subversive. She sang it on the Smothers Brothers show right about the time the album was coming out and she was getting ready to go to Vegas. So, they were really trying to push it. Of course, I think they were playing on the California connection. It's a John Hartford song. I think it's strong. It's different. And again, for 1968, it's not weird in terms of its era.
It's hard not to entertain the what ifs if it had gone higher in the charts. And it's a bummer for me that it didn't, because I think it would have steered her in a different direction. Maybe one that was away from her internal inclinations, but not mine. And that's what's important here is I need more music like this. So the next one, and this is what's great about the record, that type of song transitioning into a really tear-stained chamber folk tune, a John Sebastian composition called The Room Nobody Lives In, which I also love. By the way, I love every song on this entire record. There's not a single song that stinks or is even mediocre to me.
Yeah, I agree. And The Room That Nobody Lives In is very dramatic, and you have these sound effects of it sighing. Is it someone going into this room and thinking about this? Is it the room personified, sighing? I don't know. But, there's such a strong friendship between John Sebastian and Cass going all the way back to the Big 3 days. So this was, I know, a delight for her to put down. And she also did Darling Be Home Soon, which didn't make it onto the album. But yeah, it's beautiful. The cello is beautiful in it.
Yeah, it's great. It really reminds me of Randy Newman circa I Think It's Gonna Rain Again. Mm-hmm. It's got that wrist slitter vibe to it. And then what could be my favorite song on the entire record, a John Simon song, Talking to Your Toothbrush. These are my top 5 Cass solo tunes.
Yeah, it's she's very bluesy and sleepy, and yeah, it's a great song. I think more people know it because it was the flip side of California Earthquake, so it had a little bit more visibility, if you will. But yeah, it's great.
If somebody thinks I don't like Mama Cass, I don't like that kind of show busy stuff, start here. In my personal opinion, as a Discograffiti fan, if you're like a music obsessive, check out Talking to Your Toothbrush. That'll be your gateway into this thing.
Well, and it just shows she could sing anything.
Speaking of, we go from that, that sort of sleepy, opiated vibe, narcotic bliss, into a fucking honky-tonkin' greasy strip joint thing.
Yeah.
Blues for Breakfast, written by Richard Manuel, which in its original iteration on the Basement tapes.
I love it. I think it's brilliant. I mean, I would say the same thing is kind of true about this song that you just said about Talking to Your Toothbrush. I mean, she's gritty here, and she loved that.
One of the great things about this record is, even though I love every song, let's say you came at this and you didn't, you still have to respect the idea of her jumping from lily pad to lily pad genre-wise, because if you don't like, the sort of strip club vibe on this, we're going straight into a gospel soul rave up in the Mad Dogs and Englishmen tradition on the next one, which is Leonard Cohen's You Know Who I Am.
That and Sweet Believer are very spiritual, as you said. This is very gospel infused. Brenda Holloway and the Blossoms are backgrounding for her, which is lovely and great. She doesn't need them, but it's great to have them along, if you will.
Speaking of Sweet Believer, written by Cyrus Faryar, the great Cyrus Faryar from Modern Folk Quartet, and Fred Neil and his incredible underrated solo works. Rubber Band is the next song, also written by Cyrus. And this is like a Salvation Army marching band slice of what feels like kind of silliness, a little bit of comic relief. But it works for me, again, in the context of this stylistic melange.
Yeah, it's very quirky.
And again, taking a hard left after that, these are like glass smashers. The only thread that ties the thing together is the sound effects, which John Simon was kind of a genius if that was his idea to do that. But Long Time Loving You, the next one, is a pretty short, just under 2 minutes, piccolo-led chamber folk miniature with some crazy time signature herky-jerkiness going on with it.
That's a Stuart Scharf song. Stuart worked a lot with Spanky and Our Gang. Yeah, it's real groovy. It's one of my favorites, probably because of that timing. It is so complicated, but she makes it sound easy.
Right. She really does. Just like John Simon, threaded the complex assemblage of these tunes together, her vocal laying on top of it pulls this song together.
Yeah, and I think it was probably his genius and his idea on the sound effects. She was friends with Phil and Una Austin of the Firesign Theater, because I've talked to them in years past, and I mean, they remember the record. So I think she at least participated in bringing them to it. Firesign Theater was a big comedy entity at the time.
I know that just a year previous, they had done the sound effects for the Byrds' Draft Morning on Notorious Byrd Brothers, but of course they were releasing incredibly vital work. Then you have John Simon's kind of hoedown tune, Jane the Insane Dog Lady. When I think of records like this, the first image that comes to mind, as a filmmaker, whenever I would be looking for actors and get inundated with headshots, there were actors that would do the quadrant style headshot. So instead of conveying their range in their choice of material that they acted in, they would show, here's me as a cop, here's me as a fireman, here's me as a caveman. And so the external is supposed to show the range. And while those headshots are ultimately laughable, in my opinion, the way that she pulls it off here is exceptional. What Was I Thinking Of, written by Leah Cohen. The next song is just a ripping ballad and easily one of the best songs on the record, I think.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's like a summer night in the Hollywood Hills or somewhere else. It's her sister. It's her younger sister, and it's her younger sister really at the beginning of her songwriting career. So it was a real gift. Leah has said that to Leah for Cass to record this. Leah was about 20 when the song was written.
But it goes both ways, because this is definitely, to me, one of the best songs here. Sitting right next to one of her best buddies, who at that time had many hits, Graham Nash, Burn Your Hatred, which is an atypical song for Graham. It's a country tune with a kind of bizarre ascending progression on the verses. And it runs counter to the typical, really simple Nash fare. And it's got a great chorus, too. I love Burn Your Hatred.
Yeah, it is good. And it is odd for him And she's, showing these sort of country blues chops here. And it has that kind of almost spoken word lead up. You love it because of the song and the uniqueness of it, but also because it's great.
Yeah. And then couldn't hope for a better closer with Cyrus's Sweet Believer.
Yeah.
An appropriately wondrous closer for a really magical record. To end it on this note is beautiful. I love that she included 2 Cyrus tunes, and both of them couldn't be more opposed and oppositional in their styles.
Yeah, very different from Rubber Band, ethereal. You just feel like you're floating out into the universe or something, closing up with this.
When she presented the record to the boardroom heads at Dunhill, I can only imagine she was super psyched going in there with the tapes, but apparently they were not that happy with it. They had expected her to produce material that was aligned with her Mamas and Papas work. And correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, but they apparently felt that what she'd created was really only marketable to those underground papers and the hippie audience.
I think you're right. They expected John Phillips or Rodgers and Hart, and that's given probably their demographic, what they liked.
Yeah, and it's a bummer it landed as it did. It did sell over 150,000 copies, so it was moderately successful. But on the Billboard chart, it didn't peak any higher than number 87.
Yeah, and I do wonder if part of that is because of the debacle in Vegas. That was a 3-week engagement. It was $40,000 per week, which was an enormous amount of money. She lost 100 pounds before it. I mean, it was a really big deal. I mean, in some ways, she's the first solo female headliner in Vegas of the rock variety. And this is kind of the stuff that was in that show. Mason Williams worked with her on it, but it was this material. She was going to do some Mamas and Papas stuff, but it was very much this kind of thing. So I think because, it closed after one night. I mean, she truly bombed. And so I think that didn't help the record.
The most horrifying thing in thinking back to that is John writes about it in Papa John, and it's terrifying to even read. But there was a second show that night, wasn't there?
Yes.
That's the most horrifying thing to think of. To bomb and then to be pushed back out on the stage and bomb again.
Yeah.
But, the record itself, it's absolutely a lost classic. Way, way more than any other of Cass's solo records. Dream represents the whole of her talent range that I can hear. It has so many styles and genres embedded in the grain here that it practically represents a concept album without a concept even needed. Although obviously the sound effects don't hurt. And John Simon gives her not just the space, but a respectful late 60s psych framework in which I think she shines brighter than she'd ever shine again, which is why I'm going to be ceding a lot of the floor to Richard from here on in. It is worth a re-listen or a listen if you're not familiar with it. This is a hard 5, as I like to say.
Yeah, that's an easy 5 for me. It's not exactly like John's Wolf King album, but it's sort of one of those that gets buried maybe, and people should rediscover. And it really helps you with the roadmap of the Mamas and the Papas after the Mamas and the Papas.
It is the only outlier in her entire solo catalog, notwithstanding the Dave Mason collaboration, really.
Well, it's the only real rock album she did besides that one. You're right. She doesn't stay in that milieu.
Oh, hi. I got to tell you about the next tier. As a lieutenant, you get an ad-free, substantially elongated director's cut of every episode. And you'll be getting the shows a few days earlier than the general populace, which is designed to make you feel even more special than you already are. And now back to our expertly crafted program. So then we have June 1969, Bubblegum, Lemonade, and Something for Mama. Just in case you thought she was sticking with the underground papers, the Bubblegum and the Lemonade is a clue that maybe she'd moved on. Arranged and produced by Steve Barry, who wrote You Baby, right?
Yes, he's in-house at Dunhill. So I think that unfortunately this album, because of the title and the front cover, suffers undeservedly. For those who don't know, she's on the front of the album in a rocking chair and a sort of little girl white dress. I mean, she looks great. And Gary Burden and Henry Diltz did the cover. And Gary told the story that he and Leah, her sister, and a lot of other people chewed the pink bubble gum that formed sort of this grill work border around the photograph of her on the front. So it's certainly not her on a motorcycle with her Baby, which is the cover of the preceding album. The back of this album, I often wonder if that had been the front of this album or if it had just been called Something for Mama or Something More from Mama.
Right. It's such a hard about face.
Bubblegum back then didn't have quite as bad of a taste as it does now.
I love Bubblegum. I have no problem with Bubblegum, and I have no problem with the record. You know, for the sake of keeping things cohesive for the listener, it was later released again in November 1969 after her solo single Make Your Own Kind of Music had been released and was successful. It was added to the record, and then to make things even more confusing and more convoluted title-wise, it was renamed Make Your Own Kind of Music / It's Getting Better.
Yeah, so this is like classic unabashed, we're going to catch in on these songs, come hell or high water.
It is not false advertising. It is primarily a bubblegum pop album, but there's a little bit of country, Tin Pan Alley, and jazz in it. It reached 91 on the Billboard chart, so we're still kind of swimming toward the bottom of the top 100. But the songs from the record are still amongst the most popular of her career.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Move In a Little Closer, Baby. It's Getting Better, which was a huge hit, and a huge hit in England. I mean, it was certainly one of the biggest Cass hits and Mamas and Papas related hits, and big over here, too. Stayed on the charts a long time. Right now, Make Your Own Kind of Music has sort of had this renaissance, but It's Getting Better, also written by Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil, was the hit before that. But what I wanted to say is that Sour Grapes kind of reminds me of Burn Your Hatred. I mean, it's a country kind of song. And then to me, He's a Runner, Who's to Blame, and even Blow Me a Kiss are more serious, and they get kind of forgotten. Lady Love is, I don't know how to call that bubblegum. It's Delaney and Bonnie that was written for Cass about her daughter Owen, and she has this wonderful spoken word intro. So I think everything gets eclipsed by Make, and It's Getting Better. Easy Come, Easy Go is definitely bubblegum type of stuff.
I Can Dream, Can't I is not bubblegum. That's a beautiful...
No, it's not. It's a classic. And what they were trying to do there was something sort of like with Dream a Little Dream with Me. That's exactly what they were going for.
When they get there, the strong man's bell is rung on that one.
Yeah, and she sang that on American Bandstand, of all things.
Oh, cool.
One thing I want to say about this album, Dave, is that it is a remarkable comeback. So we can talk about the title, and maybe there was some wisdom in it because of the fall she had taken in the fall of 1968. But she made a pretty big comeback with this record and with herself, because to have bombed as big as she did in Vegas in October 68, and then to be on network TV with her own self-titled television special by the summer of 69, she climbed back up. So she used maybe things like Move In a Little Closer, Baby to do so, but she did get herself back in the game. And I think that deserves credit, and probably more credit than it's given, because a lot of people wouldn't have been heard from again.
Yeah, I mean, that can't be easy to go through that and then to actually put that behind you. So the first time I ever heard both It's Getting Better and Make Your Own Kind of Music were in the series Lost.
Yes.
The beginning of that one episode of Lost, where it starts with Make Your Own Kind of Music, I immediately stopped the episode and track the song down. I'd not heard it before. And so it's great for those two cultural artifacts to have so prominently featured these works.
Yeah, those songs, and that's kind of the Barry Mann, Cynthia Weil mini canon of Cass, if you will. Those two songs in the New World Coming as well definitely have kind of a Energizer Bunny life in films and television, and now really social media. And Lost was huge for people rediscovering or discovering Cass and who she was as a solo artist.
Yeah, because I was a Mamas and Papas obsessive, and I didn't know that song yet for whatever reason. But
right.
Here's my little review. One for the bubblegum crowd, you can tell it had, or at least it seems to me like it had far less personal meaning to her and was assembled to rebound from the Vegas fiasco. But it'll appeal more to the middle of the road, less hippie, empathetic element of you folk out there in Discograffiti'ville. Special marks for a terrific and really moving version of Laura Nero's He's a Runner. But if there's one thing that's a total turnoff for me, It's Tin Pan Alley style Mama Cass. It feels to me, and maybe she liked this, but it feels like she's being paraded around by straights, for straights. And I just wind up feeling badly for her. I love this record, but it's hard to recommend it unreservedly to those really and truly in the know, because Dream to me is the one. That's the one. This one's for folk who I believe don't dig beneath the surface and know the difference. But that being said, harsh review for a record that I give 4 1/3 stars.
I'm right there between probably 4 3/4 and 5 with it. I think it is unduly criticized because of what I said at the beginning of our conversation about it. I agree with you that the more serious material to me is brilliant. It's also eclectic, and I think this goes to this observation, which is very profound by Michelle in terms of a search for material. But I think she was not forced to do the Tin Pan Alley show business type stuff. She liked it. That's what she grew up in. She would have easily done that in a stage or film musical. I think also you have to take into account she is so huge in 1969. I mean, Mama Cass is one of probably the top 5, if not top 3 celebrities. I mean, she's just huge. She figures into, an Archie song lyric. I mean, she's going to be in a movie in 6 months. I mean, it's almost like whatever she did was interesting to the public. In terms of legacy, though, I think it deserves better than it always gets. And that's because of some of the trappings around it.
It's funny. I wrote this review, and I think a lot of my particular take on her solo career, it feels to me a certain way that apparently it really wasn't. She liked this kind of stuff. And because of her stake in the counterculture previous to this, it just feels to me like they're putting their hands, behind her mouth and making her do this stuff when they're not. That's an illusion that I have about her work. I mean, just as far as Bubblegum itself goes, not necessarily Broadway or Tin Pan Alley, she said Bubblegum music is very pleasant to listen to, but it's like they say about Chinese food, half an hour after tasting it, you're hungry again. But she also conceded that maybe Bubblegum is what I'm supposed to be doing since my voice is very light. I just can't sing heavy material.
I think she was wrong in that second statement. She also said in the first quote, but it's not exactly social commentary.
So then came in 1969, her single, Make Your Own Kind of Music, which I think in a sense, next to the Dream a Little Dream LP, might be my definition of what I consider to be her masterpiece. So I'll give this 5 stars.
Easily 5 stars, and easily, if not the signature song for Cass Elliot, a signature song for her.
And then the follow-up single to Make Your Own Kind of Music is New World Coming, which is another Man Weil song, and similarly a sugar-coated message song. Kind of the same old stuff. It's nothing special, nothing new, but solid enough is kind of how I feel about New World Coming.
Yeah, I like it. I think, as I said, it's of its time, and I like the way you put it in terms of a what did you call it? Sugar-coated message song. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's a good song. It's a short song. And it certainly got some chart action. People love that song. I mean, some of these songs are, you talk to people now and it meant something to them. And this is the era where she's kind of sputtering out of Dunhill with these singles.
Which, is further exacerbated as far as the piecemeal thing, with Dunhill releasing her 3rd solo album in October 1970, which is really a compilation of 7 of her singles. And it's called Mama's Big Ones, which is kind of faintly derogatory.
Yeah.
And plus some previously unreleased tracks. This is her last solo album on Dunhill. I'll give it 4 stars.
Yeah, I give it 5. I can't not. But we didn't talk too much about One Way Ticket, which I think is one of the strongest tracks. I think it had single potential as well, written by the same guys that wrote Freddie B, You and Me and Sesame Street Theme. And I mean, it's just so buoyant, and she really nailed it in terms of her vocal performance. So it is this style, but it's really strong for that, and Helen Reddy sang it as well. But it is a cash in, and I just selfishly wish it was an all Cass album. with all due respect to the Mamas and Papas hits. I just wish that it had been filled out with just her.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like you throw Words of Love on there and it's redolent of, the Beach Boys' greatest hits coming out right after Pet Sounds. It's just like, fuck you guys.
Yes.
That's what I mean about the 4 stars. But, with regard to her performances on it, it's definitely closer to a 5. But I disagree with you on One Way Ticket. I don't like that song. But that's what makes horse racing.
That's right.
You can't throw me in jail for that one, Your Honor.
No, not at all.
All right. So then we move into territory that I believe is vastly underrated. The 1971 Dave Mason and Cass Elliot record is terrific.
It's great, but it's like artistic whiplash. Here we go.
So here's the conception of it. Apparently, Graham Parsons introduced them.
Graham and Cass were good friends.
Was the idea that we're going to just team up and just start working together, or we're just going to do one record together?
I think it's more of the latter. I mean, it's just so organic. This is the whole Laurel Canyon salon. People hang out at my house and we make music, and she's got enough clout that if Cass Elliot wants to make an album and she's got this new guy that she likes, let's do it. I mean, she had that much ability, and then he carried enough weight himself too that let's do it. I don't think there was a vision of them going on as a duo indefinitely.
Cass was supposed to be the co-producer with Mason on a solo album by Dave Mason. But after Cass sang background on some of the sessions, it started to organically develop into a collaboration.
Right.
But to be fair, it's a little bit more of a Dave Mason record. So a lot of her contributions are limited to background vocals. But what I like about this one is that it really hangs together as a release. It's kind of the anti-Dream a Little Dream. It's stylistic whiplash from what came before, but this album is of a piece. It's a country rock sort of harmony-laden sound that is redolent to the time with a bluesy edge to it. Dave wrote 5 of the songs on the record. Cass co-wrote 2. The single, Something to Make You Happy, and her only solo song on the record, which is Here We Go Again. And also worthy of note for anyone in the middle of reading, getting kind of itchy, this is the first time that Cass had delved into songwriting since her days with the Big Three and the Mugwumps. And it was the last time, too.
Yes, very well said and good to point out. And I think shows she did have abilities in that regard. Yeah, I mean, she turns back into rock here. You're right. Most people probably know that she did uncredited backing vocals on Pre-Road Downs in '69 for Crosby, Stills and Nash, and she had done backgrounds on Stephen Still's solo album. And she still has kind of one foot in this world. And I do feel like it's because a lot of her friends, those were her friends, her close personal friends.
I'd like to point out that my thoughts on Dave Mason is he burned super bright as a talent for a very brief time. I think he was seen as such a threat to Stevie Winwood that he was basically booted out of traffic. And then as a solo star, as far as I'm concerned, he basically had Alone Together and this. Touches of aspects of sort of generic songwriting start to creep into his work around this time and then just overwhelm him by the mid-70s. Some people, like Stephen Stills, they say what they have to say in a short period of time, and then they just keep saying it and saying it and saying it. So when you become a major, you'll be getting access to the ultimate director's cuts of all our sprawling, super deep dive episodes. As far as I'm concerned, these super cuts have absolutely everything that was meant to be heard. Plus, you get yours before the lieutenants get theirs. But that ain't it. You also get all our other series, like Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure Show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off Show, Queasy Listening, and exclusive limited series like The Private Press with Paul Major. And if you've got no financial worries to speak of, keep in mind that some of the higher Patreon tiers allow you to actually advertise on the show, choose the bands we cover, or even some of the guests we get. For the price of a cup of coffee a week, you can ensure my family's fed, build a music library that'll be the envy of your block, and connect to a thriving community of music maniacs all at the same time. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Patreon.com/Discograffiti. Once again, that's Patreon.com/Discograffiti. let's drop the needle on this thing. By the way, one last note about this that's very confusing to me is that this record did a lot better than the records that came before this for her. It reached number 49. Her work was lingering and treading water in just the bottom of the top 100. So it's odd to me that this was basically her goodbye to the underground.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And it really stands the test of time. I find this record pretty timeless. I mean, it's of its time, but it's a record you can put on no matter what the setting, and it works. It's just amazing to me.
I listen to it a lot. For fun, I throw this on pretty consistently. It, I believe, starts with the best song on the record, which is Walk to the Point. It's an incredible tune in that Delaney and Bonnie type of songwriting.
It starts you off with a bang, which I like.
Yeah, it's got a lot of energy and pep to it. And then we go into On and On, which is written by a guy who was kind of written out of the story of music history, Ned Doheny, but he was one of the first people signed to Geffen, and he was going to be a big deal. Not quite sure what happened there, but I'm sure we'll explore it on a future episode. But On and On is a solid song. To Be Free, another good Dave Mason song. Again, not Walk to the Point. It really raises the bar, that song. But her co-write with Brian Garrow, this is a pretty cool song because you have strings and bongos on it. So you get the MOR Cass and the hippy dippy Cass.
I agree. It's one of my favorites. I mean, wonder what that would have done as a single, you know?
It's like you get both sides of her career schizophrenia in one song.
Right. So your MOR people buy this record and that's what they want to listen to.
Right, exactly. And then Pleasing You is one of the best songs on the album, I think.
After Here We Go Again, like Pleasing You, Sit and Wonder, Something to Make You Happy, and even 2 Month Truth, to me, she's more prevalent and prominent, and I like them better because I think it's better with her.
I agree. The shape of this record, the only stretch that you kind of have to get through to where it's really consistent. Walk to the Point is so good that you're just hanging in there for a few songs waiting for it to be as good. And then if you stick around to track 5, to Pleasing You, I totally agree. It's a straight shot through to the end.
Yeah.
Something to Make You Happy, written by Dave and Cass. Terrific harmonies. Just a wonderfully written pop tune that makes you wonder why she sat out the 70s as a tunesmith.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, she wouldn't write with John because I think she didn't want to get into it with him.
Too Much Truth, Too Much Love, which is such the apotheosis of the Dave Mason song title from this time. It's a gorgeous song produced with stunning space, and there's such great heartbreaking detail to those harmony vocals.
Yeah, beautiful harmonies.
And like you said, Next to You, solid tune, but one of the best on the record is the final tune by Dave Mason, Glittering Facade. Just an incredible closer.
Yeah, it's not my favorite on the album. I respect it and I think it's good, but I get a little lost, a little weary.
It's sad to me that this album is not really remembered. A lot of people don't know this one. I think it deserves far more attention than it gets. I'll give it 4.5 stars.
I gave it 5 easy, and I think it's a buried treasure. But I do think some of the other records we've talked about, Cass's first album, John's solo album, I think it stands the test of time. Let's see. It always gets respect. There are very few people that diss this album.
And because of that, because she's vying for the underground respect here, the sharp turn back toward the middle of the road, here's where I personally start to lose interest in her solo career. Not that there's not songs that I like on the records, but her work with RCA, although she signed with them in July 1970, she did not begin recording her first record for the label until late 71. So the self-titled Cass Elliot record came out in January 1972. It was produced by Louis Merenstein with Benny Golson, who served as conductor and arranger. RCA apparently gave her complete artistic freedom, and Cass was the one who pursued a more pared down, sophisticated record for her first album with them. Most of the songs were recorded live in the studio. She chose mostly standards and apparently saw this as her opportunity to really kind of break with the Mama Cass past and distinguish herself as her namesake. But it was not a hit. And she had a lot of foresight because later on, you had tons of people Rod Stewart, Bette Midler, from the songbook types of records.
Yes.
Those would be very prevalent. But at the time, this was thoroughly out of sync.
I completely agree with you in that she was ahead of her time in doing the standards. I mean, she had done them with the Mamas and the Papas. We've talked about the fact that she did them on her solo albums. But I think she was right there. And I've already said when we were talking about this earlier, what if this had been all standards? I mean, what if they'd really gone that direction? Now, Lou Merenstein was a prince of a man. I knew him. He had done Astral Weeks for Van Morrison. He loved Cass. I think he was more involved in the material selection. I mean, it wasn't all her. This isn't the John Simon experience. I mean, I think they definitely were pushing her more, I would think, to mature. I think they were maybe trying to be all things to all people. But a lot of people consider this really her magnum opus. You consider her first Dunhill, but a lot of people think of this as really more of who she was. And she, had the backing and the orchestra and that sort of thing. And it holds together. It's not quite as eclectic maybe as the first Dunhill album. Maybe that's why people say that. And because she had left Dunhill, so there's some independence about it. But I love it. I mean, I think it's evergreen. It's not what we're going to get to in the next album.
I think there's 3 great songs on it.
Tell me.
Disney Girls, which is not my favorite Beach Boys song, but you got Bruce Johnston and Carl Wilson on this. There's a terrific vocal blend, and I think it's better than the Beach Boys version, and they're my favorite band. I think It's Gonna Rain Today is excellent, and then possibly the best song on it is by her sister Leah, When It Doesn't Work Out. I mean, it feels like Sati Gymnopédie. It's just a really great foundation for her voice, and I think Leah was just about the most sympathetic songwriter who contributed material to her records.
She's excited about this. I mean, it's a 10-album deal. It's a really big record deal and a really new, she's turned the page here. She heads into 72. For better or for worse, she's made an alliance with Alan Carr as a manager. She's going to get back out there and do cabaret type shows. So she's really turning direction sort of full force here.
For being as dismissive towards some of this stuff, my review and my star rating is still not denigrative. This one I dig, although the replay value for me is lower than the other ones of hers that I'm drawn to, just based on personal music preferences, but that's all. It's actually really good, but ultimately it's not for me on the level of what came before. But I know a lot of people, Richard included, obviously, who would disagree with me on this one. And I respect those opinions because I see the value in the work. It all comes down to personal taste when it comes to the great songbook and standards. Although admittedly, she does spice it up with some cool selections. I'm going to give it 3 3/4 stars.
Well, surprise of all surprises, I give it my 5. I think it's her stake in the ground. It's her flag on the moon. This is where I'm headed, and I like that about it. And I also think she's in strong form here.
I agree, but she stays here for the remainder of her career, which is not that long, but to me, it's kind of a straight shot down at this point. October 1972, The Road Is No Place for a Lady. Apparently that was the truth for her. This is the 5th and final studio album by Cass, and it's essentially pop music, but with a few different styles woven in. There's some swing music, some gospel. You have a couple singles released. The first one is If You're Gonna Break Another Heart, written by Albert Hammond and released in August 72, which did not trouble the charts. Second single, Does Anybody Love You, released in November. RCA did give her complete control. As with her previous album, the album was not a hit. And I would say that there's 3 great songs on it, and that other than the 3 great songs, I really have not much use for this record. Saturday Suit by Jimmy Webb. Love Was Not a Word, a beautiful ballad that rises above the rest of the record because it's got like a gorgeous Gamble Huffish shimmering string accompaniment, but especially Leah Kunkel's The Road Is No Place for a Lady, a stunning ballad, a perfect closer for the record. Leah coming through yet again. Now tell me how your opinion massively differs.
Well, it's a fascinating record. So this is really the last time in the studio. I mean, her final album is the capture of a show. We'll talk about some of the recording of it. But anyway, this is Lou Merenstein again. It was recorded in England at Trident Studios. And from my conversations with Lou, it was not a particularly happy time in her life. She kept to herself a fair amount. I think Obey What Would You Say would have been a killer single. I think that was a real miss. They should have gotten that out before Hurricane Smith. But
I hate that song. I
really?
Yeah, I hate it. It's my least favorite look on her.
Well, that's a part of her, I think, that people really dig about her.
I know. So like I said, I'm kind of the outside looking in on her career,
Well, I don't know that you're alone. I think it's really great that we have these differing perspectives. And I share your love for her edgier side, but I think it's just true that she had a good time with this kind of thing.
I have a short review for this one. Okay. 3 amazing songs, and otherwise what we've got here is a sack full of sap, 2.25 stars.
Ooh, rough. I think because it was buried so long and I worked so hard on it, I can't get away from my full-on 5 stars. But I acknowledge that there's no hit here, and you wish you saw what came next with it because you feel a little bit unfinished in terms of where are we going. I mean, when you hear Leah's song, you want more. And that's
I want a whole record of Leah's songs by her. And I feel like if she'd lived, that record would have come and it would have been her best record.
Yeah, it might have been. I mean, All My Life is close to that kind of sound. It's quieter and it's more pensive.
And the last album was kind of sad for me to hear. I'd never heard it before. It was recorded July 20th and 22nd, 1973, and came out in September of that year, called Don't Call Me Mama Anymore, which is more proof that right up until the final moment, she just never made peace with her past. It's a live album. It's the 3rd one released by RCA and was recorded over those 2 nights at Mr. Kelly's in Chicago. There's My Love by Paul McCartney, a few classics, show tune classics. And this is where I guess she hired Alan Carr as her manager, who at the time was managing or had managed Peter Sellers, Tony Curtis, and Margaret. Unfortunately, to me anyway, Carr felt that Elliot needed to leave pop and rock completely and head into the cabaret circuit, where I believe acts go to die. And I mean that metaphorically. Like, you get the English bands who start playing seaside summer camps and things like that. So the show that was put together consisted of old standards with a few new songs written by her friends. And it's like, that whole Vegas-y thing where it's Cass along with 2 male singers who served as sidekicks and backing singers. Cream magazine at the time gave it a D, which shows that, she was completely cut off at this point from her initial underground audience. And it's just not my kind of thing. The cabaret Cass, for me, is not a happy look on her. I give this one 2 stars.
Chris and Bruce and sister Sandy Dedrick and younger sister Ellen joined in 1968. Never seemed as simple as they were because of the music. Music was as soft and breezy, as antithetical to the times as it implies. Vocal parts swoop in and out and double back on one another. Dances over and around acoustic guitars in the mix. There's a harpsichord, bongos, tambourine, light bossa nova flavorings, folk, and even touches that told you these kids knew something about jazz.
We got jazz.
Alan was no musician, so I like the way that you described what's going on there. I definitely think he was making recommendations based on overall image and overall career opportunities. So she's doing tons of television. She has her own television show that's really in the works when this is recorded, because it's recorded in September of 73. Michelle has reminded us she had a really bad fall and had to have knee surgery that summer. So she talks about a cane in the act. She wasn't in the best of health. But she and Alan had this kind of weird relationship. I mean, someone told me there ought to be a TV movie just about the two of them because there was a lot of bickering, but they loved, best of friends, worst enemies kind of thing.
Was she still unhappy? Like she'd been unhappy from her last solo record, or was she over that?
I think she was over that some. I think 73 was kind of a new day. She had a lot of work opportunities. No, I think she was feeling, things were a bit more optimistic at that point in time. And it was television primarily, that she was really coming into, and that happened in 72. So even after the second RCA album, she was on the Julie Andrews show, which is a really big show. She was on Carol Burnett even more. So that kind of fame was picking up. She's on Scooby-Doo in 73. So she's cruising along here.
Are you 5 on this one?
I feel like I betray if I don't give it a 5. I like her show business stuff. I like the Torch song medley. I think is strong. I might come down to like a 4.5 or 4 3/4, but you have to accept, and you've been very honest, that this is person to person show business. This is what she did. Now, she said she did not like the idea of a live album. She did not feel like she deserved that. It's an important part of her career to have captured because, of course, a year later, she's gone. I think ultimately she was going to make records, but she was headed towards a lot of other pursuits. Denny and Michelle have said her own talk show, her own variety show. And so it's almost like kind of like Andy Williams, like you know him more for TV than you do for any recording he did.
I would even go one further and say she's known more for being her than she is for her music. So toward that end, no matter what record she put out in her short solo career, she always skated through because she ultimately was Cass Elliot. She was not a Vegas person. She was not an underground person. She was her. And so ultimately her solo career was a frustrating one for me because it feels like she's not really in charge of it. And with her abrupt death, before things truly got off the ground for her in that realm, there are certainly highlights. And ultimately, it hit me as better than I thought it was going to be. And it's underrated and seriously worth exploring, especially the first couple records. But it's a testament to her that as a formidable personality, it didn't matter what successes or failures she experienced, she skated through it.
Yeah, well said. I think the wonderful thing about this album, it's a little bit like when you hear her talking at Monterey, is that you get a glimpse of her personality, because that's what you're talking about, is her personality is what was as endearing to people as her singing voice, which was brilliant and unparalleled. Having a live album is important because of that and because we don't have much material. I mean, I agree with you that you sort of yearn for a fuller picture. And so it always is a little bit of like what could have been. If you were to combine the television performances of her music with her record catalog, it would be a little bit more of an accurate and probably even to somebody like you, appealing profile, if you will. The silhouette would be a little fuller. She does an almost 10-minute medley with Julie Andrews or Simon and Garfunkel songs. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable with Nelson Riddle orchestra, and it's unbelievable. But we have what we have. And it's okay to call her Mama Cash, I mean, she was Mama Cass Elliot. So I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, she was. But, you see every artist leaving a band struggling with that image when the image is what gave him the solo career in the first place. She never reached that point where inevitably she would become comfortable with that. But let's talk about and dispel those goddamn ham sandwich rumors, because I will say that if anyone makes a comment that's tossed off and derogatory about ham sandwiches in the Facebook group, those comments will be deleted. And I don't usually say things like that, and I'm usually pretty open-minded. But for whatever reason, I find it totally offensive that that is the myth that has proliferated. Let's talk about her passing, okay? On April 22nd, 1974, Cass collapsed in the studio of The Tonight Show right before she was scheduled to appear on the show. She was treated and released at a hospital and dismissed the whole thing as just exhaustion when she was interviewed about it. She completed 2 weeks of solo shows at the London Palladium on Saturday, July 27th, and celebrated for 24 hours. She first attended the 31st birthday party of Mick Jagger, at his home. And then after the party, she went to a brunch in her honor presented by Georgia Brown. And while there, according to her biographer, Eddie Fiegel, she was blowing her nose a lot, coughing, having trouble breathing. Then she went to a cocktail party and seemed in high spirits, but also appeared tired and sick. She left the party at 8 p.m. on Sunday, the 28th of July, saying she needed to go get some sleep. She went back to an apartment in Mayfair at Curzon Place where Harry Nilsson had allowed her to stay, and she died in her sleep at age 32 that night. Keith Simpson, who conducted her autopsy, said that she died of a heart attack, and there were no drugs in her system. She died in flat 12, 9 Curzon Place, later Curzon Square in Shepherd Market in Mayfair, London. And 4 years later, Keith Moon died in the same bedroom, also 32.
Yes. Very eerie. In addition to that episode on The Tonight Show, end of February of 74, on a plane, on a flight going to Miami from Vegas, she had an episode. The papers recorded as some sort of heart spasm or seizure. And, something was going on. She had been in the hospital in Honolulu the preceding December for like 2 weeks. She went there to do a 2-week gig, and she was there for almost 10 out of the 14 days. So clearly something was going on health-wise leading up to her time in London.
Do we know how she...
Well, she did have medical attention after the airplane episode, and she was taken to the hospital after the Tonight Show. I mean, they chalked it up for maybe low blood sugar, but I think there was something, and again, we're talking about 1974, which isn't 1924, but, run some tests. So you probably had low blood sugar. She was a smoker and overweight. It's still unusual for somebody that age to die of a heart attack, but she had done some extreme dieting during her life and also had other health risks, just given substance abuse in the past. Owen, her daughter, is coming out with a book in May, and will, I think, talk more about it. I don't think there's any bombshell revelations. It's along the lines of what you've been kind and what we've tried on the website for 27 years to be clear about, and that is that this is a horrible urban legend. It emerged because when Alan Carr, who was back in the States, got word that she had passed away, I think there was fear that there could have been something more untoward involved. And so she had a sandwich in the room. And so he latched onto that and posed it as a possibility of something that had happened, but it wasn't borne out. And of course, it just ran away, and so sadly, as I think Leah has said, and I've said, Owen has said, it just contributes to a caricature of a person who really didn't deserve to be caricatured. And, I hope time will continue to bear out the lie of that myth and the truth, which is just a very tragic fact that she died of a heart attack.
It's really sad because that has become the accepted fact, when in the course of things, it has nothing to do with anything. And it's
Right.
also sad. It's like she's one of the only people from the great rock and roll era there who was not wasted when she died. I mean, she just passed away of quote unquote natural causes or whatever it was. And the world still palpably misses her. I mean, she's always talked about and referred, except by wankers on the internet, as a formidable presence in not just music, but entertainment.
Yeah, and the longer you live, for that to be true of you 50 years after you're gone is something. She was singular among her peers in being capable of so many different kinds of entertainment. She enjoyed entertaining people. And, she was witty. She was a brilliant conversationalist. She was a social magnate who we know is responsible for putting together the Lovin' Spoonful and Crosby, Stills and Nash to some extent. She was a singer. She could act. We haven't talked much about the fact, but she really had acting ability that never really got, underway. And she was a mom. I think she's just a great personality in the pantheon of American entertainers.
She really is. And she is sorely missed.
All right, that about does it. Stay tuned, because next Friday, Michelle Phillips does a deep dive into, yeah, that's right, Michelle Phillips, as she examines her own solo career. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Michelle Phillips, Richard Campbell,
Fernando Perdomo, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, and access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the greatest music ever made from the 1960s is to leap headfirst into my 12-hour interview with Jules Alexander and Terry Kirkman, the two founding members of Monterey Pop opening act The Association. That's episodes 110 to 113. Vashti Bunyan rating her entire catalog. That's 103 and 104. Os Mutants Sergio Diaz on the early days of the band, that's 86 and 87. Burt Summer, 83 and 84. A tribute to David Crosby, that's 77 and 78. Lou Barlow rates the Zombies, that's 59 and 60. Bob Forrest on the band, that's 25 and 27. Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rating the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. The Bee Gees Psychedelic Beginnings, that's episode 10. And Sly and the Family Stone, episodes 5, 6, and 7. Join us during the upcoming week. This Sunday, you can expect another deliriously sociopathic entry of Rudy Fishman's Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Get to know your new music-obsessed friends. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, May 31st, we're coming at you with Michelle Phillips taking a microscope to her own solo career. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!
Osiris.